Welcome to another episode of Taking Down Trump. I am your host, Tristan Snell. We have a wonderful episode planned for you. Representative Jamie Raskin is going to be joining us here on the show. We're really excited to have him. We're also going to be talking about the top story in the news this week, which is the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene, especially the flooding in North Carolina, but also devastation in Florida and throughout much of the Southeast, but also tying that to exactly what would happen politically and governmentally if we have a change of leadership in Washington, if we have Donald Trump come back into the White House, and exactly what that would mean for when we have these kind of horrible natural disasters. It's very much something that we must talk about. We're going to get to that later in the show. But first, an overview of some of the craziest stories that happened this week. Leading off in our crazy story department, a suddenly surprising indictment, although a lot of people in New York City knew it was coming. New York City Mayor Eric Adams, he was doing all sorts of fun things. He was getting all sorts of free travel from the Turkish government. Does that remind us of anybody we know? And he was also getting a lot of campaign money sort of back channeled to him so that it would trigger New York City's matching funds. All of this resulted in a 50-something page federal indictment by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York last week. And now Adams is trying to fight this. He isn't leaving. Again, does that sound like anybody we know? But I think it raises a lot of questions. Lots and lots of questions. We're going to be getting into these topics more and more in the weeks and months to come, because this really confirms something that I think a lot of us have been feeling for a while. There is a national problem in America with foreign corruption of our political system. And it is something that is infiltrating the Democratic Party in some cases as well. It is still overwhelmingly a problem with the Republican Party. But the defenses have somehow come down. Okay. Not that there's ever been a point that there hasn't been some of this going on, but the open season, the brazenness in which these foreign powers are engaging in bribing American officials is something that we haven't seen in this country, maybe ever, and certainly not since the Cold War, when there was a dedicated structure, apparatus, entire sets of decades of operations to infiltrating American politics, American power, American life. We're now seeing it not just from Russia. Okay, Russia, we know a lot about that. Okay, and we know the interference that is going on, especially in the cyber world, coming from China. Okay, but this is now, we're involving Turkey. What did Turkey get in return? They got a new consulate building, 30-something story tower in Manhattan that conveniently had no fire inspection. So, sort of a little PSA for my fellow New Yorkers: don't ever go to that building, because it probably would not pass code. I really hope that someone goes and checks it now, because they didn't do a fire inspection. And God only knows what else. We don't even know all of the other details. Just always remember, an indictment is just the beginning. That doesn't give all of the things that the prosecution found. It only gives some of them. So we don't even know yet all of the different things that Adams did. But boy, does that look terrible. And it's not the only news we got about foreign corruption last week. We got treated to this doozy, which is that Jared Kushner and the $2 billion fund that was handed to him by the Saudis and others after Donald Trump left office a few years ago, $2 billion investment fund. So these are assets under management. This is something that I think sometimes gets a little bit exaggerated when it gets reported, especially online, is that Kushner didn't get $2 billion. He was handed $2 billion to manage, to put to use, to go make more money, to its investment capital. That's the way these things work. People get a pool of capital. They're supposed to deploy that capital, various investments, stocks, bonds, real estate, other types of more complicated investments, whatever it is, and try to get a return. Okay. That's what this was. And yes, there then are some management fees that usually come from that. And it indeed, Kushner has been getting those management fees to the tune of so far $112 million. This did go into his pocket. Now, this is the real kicker. Despite the fact that the fund has yet to turn a profit, no profit has been made by this $2 billion fund yet. Okay. Now, look, maybe he did things that are not going to bear fruit for many years to come. I don't know. But it's just worth saying, because I went and looked this up, that if you had just taken at the time that this happened, like January, February 2021 was when this fund was set up and he was put in charge of it, mind you, with no former investment experience at all. All right. He is a Silver Spoon Trust Fund baby, to be clear, who didn't really ever have any real world experience of any kind that he did on his own anyway. He's the scion of a real estate family business here in New York City that he had some involvement in, but not really. He ran the New York Observer newspaper for a time, which he basically got to buy with daddy's money. But he had no experience actually running an investment fund, like none. He didn't even do a summer internship, as far as I know. Okay, he got handed this $2 billion fund. So if you just took the $2 billion that the Saudis gave Kushner in January, February 2021, and just stuck it in the S&P 500, you went and bought just the straight up ETF that tracks the S&P. The S&P has gone up 52%, I think, since then. And I think it might be a little bit more than that, but at least it's been up by 50%. So they should be sitting on about $3 billion instead of $2 billion in that fund if they'd just taken the most obvious thing to do. If you just put it in a goddamn savings account online, those are now making like a decent interest rate as interest rates have gone up. They would have gotten something, okay? To make no profit in what has been overall one of the best economic runs that America has been on in the last century is just absolutely mind-blowing. Everybody in finance is making money hand over fist right now, except Jared Kushner, which yields the question, is he blazingly incompetent, or was this a political buy to basically curry influence with the Trumps, right? We have to ask the question, because otherwise, I mean, this looks like a fake investment fund is what it looks like. It is getting investigated by the Senate. That's how we know about this. But we need more robust investigation about this. We need more of what happened to Eric Adams needs to happen to more of these other situations where we need to worry about foreign money coming in and influencing American politics. Crazy right-wingers, Trump, they all love to talk about the border. I talk about the border all the time. But the real devastation and just travesty and just despicable behavior that's occurring in this country is the lack of a border when it comes to foreign money, foreign influence, and foreign interference, where these folks are coming in and messing with American politics to their own ends, and they're buying American politicians. That's the border that we need to start policing in this country. That's the one. That's where the criminality is, where we're getting politicians bought and sold like it's a goddamn fantasy football auction. Okay? This is insane that we're letting this happen. But we need to move on because there's so much other news to cover. Donald Trump also let us know that he is looking into restricting or banning contraception. He said this in an interview last week. Okay? He's looking into it, is what he said. And so this is just the latest hint that if the Trump MAGA Republicans get back into power, and of course they already have their handpicked people on the Supreme Court, the next move that they're going to make after tearing apart reproductive rights with regard to abortion is to then go after, let's be really crystal clear about this, they're coming for IVF and they're coming for contraception. And these things are not going to be legal anymore. They're going to be restricted, and not just in Alabama. This is going to be national. So whether you're talking about the pill or Plan B or an IUD or condoms, hey guys, listen up. Condoms. Trump's coming for your condoms. He's looking into restrictions into contraception. Do you really think that, let's be clear, as recently as the 1960s, there were certain states where you could not buy condoms in a drugstore? As late as the 60s. It wasn't that long ago. It seems like it, but it wasn't. Okay? There's a Supreme Court case from 1965 called Griswold versus Connecticut. And that was the case in which the Supreme Court said, no, there is a right to privacy, to bodily integrity that is something that you cannot touch. State governments, local governments, so any of those local and state bans on contraception are gone. They're unconstitutional. Okay. And Connecticut, it seems weird to think about this now that Connecticut was one of the ones that had this, but there was a certain cultural conservatism and sort of in kind of the Yankee culture of that era. It was very stodgy, very puritanical. And they still had some of these laws in the books, even in what's otherwise very liberal Connecticut. So don't believe that it can't happen again. If they can turn back the clock on Roe v. Wade and get rid of it, if they can turn back the clock on civil rights, on voting rights, if they can bring isolationism and appeasement of fascism back into fashion in a way that it hasn't been since the 30s, they can absolutely go back to the 60s and 50s and say, that's it, no more contraception in the drugstore, no more contraception in the grocery store. You're going to have to kind of figure out where you can buy it from a black market vendor. This is not a joke and this is not a drill. We need to listen up and pay attention to this. And yet that wasn't the most outrageous thing Donald Trump said last week. That would have to be that he called for a really violent day of basically bloodletting. His words were really violent, but he's basically one violent day. Okay, besides the fact that I think that everybody who worked on the movie The Purge needs to go sue Donald Trump for copyright infringement. I'm only half joking about that. Can we actually believe that this is happening? If this came from a crazy sort of independent or like third, fourth, fifth, sixth party candidate, we could write it off. But for this to be said, for the leader of one of the two major parties to say, not joking whatsoever, he might try to now say it's a joke. It wasn't a joke. That we need this really violent day. He's calling for a national bloodletting. And this wasn't a major story at all. This was not a major story in the mainstream media. I just don't even understand how this is happening anymore, except that he apparently is just baked in. It's like, well, it's not news when Trump says that. But the thing is that he actually does do things like ban people of certain religions from being able to get into the country, tearing families apart, putting kids into cages. His Project 2025 calls for the deportation of millions and millions of Americans. Other statements that he's made say that that would even extend to legal immigrants. Project 2025 talks about denaturalization of already made American citizens. And you're telling me that you're not going to believe him when he says things about getting really violent. What do you think's going to happen if they try to do all of that deportation? What do you think their real agenda here? Do you think they're really going to treat everybody really nicely when they do that? And it's only another step from that to say, well, you know, it was too logistically difficult for us to deport all of these people, so we're just going to start killing them. And if that sounds extreme, go read a history book, because it isn't that extreme from the perspective of somebody who is that crazy and that evil. That's what we're up against in this country. So when he says things like this and we don't take him seriously and the mainstream media doesn't take him seriously, you got to start questioning what the mainstream media is up to and remember the fact that Donald Trump saved their business model. In 2015, most of the mainstream media outlets were in financial trouble, especially newspapers, and Donald Trump saved them. They've been on a 9-year bull run because everybody's so scared and worried and upset and freaked out that people have been consuming news at a very rapid clip. And it's been great for newspapers. It's been great for radio. It's been great for TV. And they don't want Donald Trump to go away. And we have to remember that. And if you bring that fact to you when you see what they report on and what they choose not to report on and how they frame it and how they report these things, that is a key thing to remember. Now I want to shift gears and talk about the fight from a positive perspective, but also how I think we can do even better at being able to get Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to the victory line. to take back the House of Representatives for the Democratic Party, to make sure that we hold the Senate. Kamala Harris has a absolutely fantastic policy plan that is not getting enough attention paid to it. Now, part of that is the mainstream media, but part of that is, I actually think, I'm trying to be constructive here, I think the Harris campaign needs to maybe rethink a little bit around the messaging for this, because it's an absolutely fantastic set of policies. And it's very simple. Harris has been saying them a lot. It's just her little catchphrase for it is not really a catchphrase. And her team has got to do something better here. So I'm going to have my own humble proposal here that I want us all to start taking up. And I want to start hearing from other folks for other ideas. We're going to come up with, we, the Democratic Internet, are going to come up with a better name for her set of policies here. It's very simple. It's a $6,000 child tax credit. It is a $25,000 tax credit for buying your first home, and a $50,000 tax credit for starting your own business. And that is a fantastic set of policies. It is targeted and designed to help younger Americans get more of a leg up in an economy that has been often difficult for a lot of folks the past 15 years. If you go back to the crash back in the late 2000s, a lot of millennials and Gen Z folks have been weathering a lot of storms just when a lot of folks were starting to get on their feet with their jobs, careers, business, whatever. Then COVID came, and that wiped out, shut down an entire generation of businesses. America being America, what did we do? We've now been starting up more businesses at a more rapid clip the last couple of years than at almost any time in American history, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. The spirit of entrepreneurship in this country is alive and well, and always a good time to remind ourselves of the fact that immigrants start up new businesses at an even higher clip than non-immigrant Americans. Fun fact. So when we talk about the spirit of entrepreneurship and enterprise in this country, immigrants are a major part of that. But let's just remember that for a second. We need a better name for this, though. So she's talking about the 6,000, the 25,000, the 50,000. The term that gets used for this when Harris talks about it, it's what she calls her opportunity economy. And that's a perfectly okay name as the placeholder for this kind of thing. I've been in Democratic politics in some ways, one way or another, even lightly, just been around it for 25, 30 years. I'm a total political junkie. I've worked on other political campaigns. I've done little bits of things here and there. I'm much more involved today. That is the kind of phrase that it's gotten used by Democratic policy people for a whole generation or so now. And it never is good. If you hear those words, it's something that comes from some think tank or some sort of policy session, and it's really, really boring. And no opportunity economy, those words sound meaningless to the average person. I don't even think they probably sound meaningful to the people who wrote them. Okay. So I have when we come up with policies with those kinds of names, it puts people to sleep, and we need to not do that. And I'm not saying we're going to come up with something cool, because politics is rarely cool. It's going to be cringe to some degree, but at least have a little bit more pizzazz and maybe be a little bit more reflective of what it is. I did a tweet the other day in which I just referred to it as a launch pad, and I think it resonated with a lot of people. It can be something launch pad, rocket ship, something. It's a boost to give to people to get them going. Something that brings that connotation, I think, would be helpful. And it's not going to be, again, I'm not going for cool here. I mean, I'm not cool either. This is not about being cool. It's just about being something a little bit more evocative, a little bit more oomph. So I'm hoping we can come up with something, because it's a really, really good set of policies, and I think it would win over a lot of people. In the meantime, tell everyone that this is happening. Because for folks who want to start a family, buy a home, start a business, this is the biggest thing to happen for people to have more of an opportunity in life. Yeah, I'm going to use that word in passing, but it shouldn't be the headline. This is a launch pad for people. It is really, in a lot of ways, one of the most exciting economic policies I've heard from any politician in my lifetime. And it should have a name that goes along with that. So I think that it's simple. It's that just being able to say those dollar figures, the 6,000, the 25,000, the 50,000, give it a better name. That's all I'm saying. Give it a better name. We need to come up with one, and I'm going to work on that. And I want all of you to help me. But next, before we later go on and brainstorm on Twitter and Substack about how to rename some of these policies, I know we're going to have Jamie Raskin on in just a minute. I want to make sure that we spend some time talking about the horrible, horrible news out of the Southeast with the devastation wrought by Hurricane Helene. There have been a tragically large number of people who've lost their lives here. The devastation, the number of homes destroyed, people without power, people without access to food and clean water. It is absolutely heartbreaking to see these things happen. We need to have an entirely separate conversation, and we will in a future episode, about how all of this ties into the climate crisis and what we need to be doing more than we're already doing, because these kind of storms are getting worse and they're getting more frequent. And that's a whole other conversation that we need to have. But let's just talk about how we can even react. Forget proact for a second. Like, how are we going to try to stop the climate crisis from getting to a point of no return? How do we stop it from getting worse? Let's just talk about reacting even in the moment once one of these crises has occurred on the ground, with flooding, with storm surges, with wind damage. What happens when we have a natural disaster in this country? What has happened in this case is that you have certainly state and local response. You have a lot of really brave first responders who rush in, but there's also a lot of other things that need to happen. You bring in first responders from other states. You have to get food and water where it needs to go. You have to get often expensive equipment. You need more generators. You need more cranes and other construction equipment to clean up debris. You need search parties. You need helicopters. There's a whole lot of things that you need to get deployed. All of that takes a lot of money. And a lot of times it's way too much for whatever county got hit. You get a small rural county in North Carolina, they don't have the budget for all that stuff, and they only have so many people that live there and work there. They need help. And the state government can send a lot of help, but they can only do so much. The federal government is, of course, going to be the place that they turn. The federal government just has a lot more resources, can get a lot of help moved around very quickly, right? That ability to get people and material and money moved super fast and get a lot of it concentrated to a spot and be able to help people when they're in crisis, it is completely crucial to any effort to help these people. So let's just talk about what then Donald Trump is proposing to do, particularly in the context of Project 2025. Now, I already spoke about this in the abstract a few weeks ago when I talked about Project 2025's plans for the Department of Homeland Security, which is where FEMA sits. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Administration, and it is the primary agency charged with helping in a situation like this. You hear that name tossed around a lot as soon as there's any kind of hurricane, or often with wildfires, mudslides, earthquakes when they happen, any type of thing. When we had the fires in Maui, FEMA is critical to that. There's also federally backed flood insurance. If you don't actually have federal backing on a lot of this flood insurance, it wouldn't exist. The private insurance carriers wouldn't write the policies, and increasingly they're not anyway. This is a huge problem, especially in Florida, where the state is not doing enough to actually stabilize the insurance market in Florida. And a lot of that falls at the feet of Governor Ron DeSantis, who has had opportunities the last couple of years to work with the Florida legislature to try to fix the flood insurance market in Florida. And instead, he's been going off on all these crazy crusades where he's been trying to attack Disney for being woke, where he's trying to ban books. That's what he's been focused on because he wanted to be president. So much for that. But that's what he's been focused on, rather than actually focusing on the nuts and bolts, the actual kitchen table issues of what affects Floridians at home And instead, their kitchen table floated away and their house floated away because Ron DeSantis, and now they're not going to be able to get a new house or rebuild, or they're going to end up in litigation or years and years of delays trying to get things to happen and get money and be able to rebuild because Ron DeSantis hasn't done enough to fix things down there. But it gets worse because Project 2025 would get rid of federally backed flood insurance. It would cut and gut FEMA, and it would actually cut the block grants to states and local governments like counties, cities, when there is a disaster. What has happened in the last few days? The Biden-Harris administration has been rushing materials and people and money in the form of block grants to these affected locations. That will not happen if Project 2025 is implemented. And that is the truth. That is not an exaggeration. It's right there in the pages of the damn document. So if you think that Donald Trump would be doing as good or better of a job at helping folks in North Carolina or Florida or Tennessee, all the different places that were affected, think again, because the actual blueprint for his administration will tell you otherwise. Because they want the federal government not doing those things anymore. They want to make it something that private enterprise does so that they can own it and control it. That's always the way with them. They don't want the federal government getting involved. They want to cut it. They want to gut it. They want to own it for themselves. That's really what they want. So if you think the devastation from Helene has been bad, and boy, has it been, it's awful. It would be so much worse with Trump back in the White House. And that is something that needs to be said. You know what? Call it politicization of a natural disaster. We've got an election going on at the same time that this is going on. And you know what? You can't just say, oh, it's politicization. We shouldn't ever do that. We need to have a real conversation about this because it would be a lot worse for these people. And people need to know that. As bad as it is, it would be so much worse if there was no federal money coming in, if FEMA couldn't deliver anything, and you left it all to private enterprise. Really? The same people that jacked up the price of your eggs and your milk and price gouged you and pretended it was inflation, you're expecting them to come in and give you free groceries? Is that really going to happen? Seriously? Yeah, that's not happening. So you're going to starve. Like, that's what's going to happen. These people are going to be suffering so much more terribly than they already are. And yes, that is a conversation that we need to have. This is a moment and a last month of national, absolutely vital importance. And we need to be having these conversations about issues that are really, really going to affect how people survive or get even more hurt than they already are. If you want to know more about what Project 2025 would mean for FEMA and for federal disaster relief in situations like this, I covered it in my episode Decoding Project 2025 back on August 1st. So make sure to listen to that. But first, we've got more to go because we've got Jamie Raskin coming right after this. Welcome back. And once again, I am proud and honored and humbled to have a guest who really doesn't need much of an introduction at all. Representative Jamie Raskin from Maryland has been one of the heroic figures in Congress fighting for our democracy as a member of the January 6th committee in the House, as well as being a author and sponsor of a host of bills designed to make our democracy stronger and to fight the forces of fraud, corruption, and fascism that are plaguing America. Representative Raskin, welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be with you.
You obviously have been one of the strongest voices on the Hill regarding democracy and its preservation and improvement, and have been very active in legislation proposals along those lines. There's a couple of things that I know you would love to see get passed in a more functional House, let's just say. Let's talk first about the Supreme Court. You have proposed a High Court Gift Ban Act. Tell us a bit about that.
The Congress has a $50 gift ban. We're not allowed to take $50, anything more than $50 from anybody who's got any business before us. And the vast majority of members just don't take anything, just not even to go down that road. Meantime, we read about Clarence Thomas having collected more than $4 million in gifts from this billionaire sugar daddy who has interest before the Supreme Court and paid off family members' home mortgage, paid off another family member's private school tuition, flew Clarence Thomas and his wife all over the world on deluxe foreign travel vacations to Indonesia and other fancy places. And the members of Congress are just astonished. I mean, we would all be in jail if we did something like that. And so we don't understand why that's not considered a bribe, how they're getting away with that. And he's not the only one. There are other members who are doing similar things. And so we want to impose the same $50 gift ban that governs members of Congress and members of the executive branch to the Supreme Court and the judicial branch. And we need an ethics regime over at the Supreme Court. The highest court in the land now has the lowest ethical standards in the country. And it's the only court in America without a binding ethics code, and they have more power than any other court does. So that's something that needs to be cleaned up quickly. We could use an inspector general over there, the way that we have inspector generals in other federal departments. And, there are other directions we have to go in terms of Supreme Court reform, because all of that really is not the worst of it. That's just the ethics crisis. It's really the legitimacy crisis, which is intertwined with the ethics crisis, but it's the legitimacy crisis that is affecting the rights and liberties of the people. I mean, this is a Supreme Court that Donald Trump brags about having packed and stacked and gerrymandered in order to get the result of overturning women's abortion rights in America. So you've got a majority of the court now defined by appointees of Trump and George W. Bush, two popular vote losers, dictating the freedoms of American women. The Republicans have lost 8 of the last 9 presidential elections in the popular vote, and yet they control or have named to the court 6 of the 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices. So that's a serious thing. President Biden has advanced a proposal for limiting terms to 18 years, in addition to all the ethics reform stuff. And we should move in that direction to allow each president to appoint 2 Supreme Court justices, stagger the terms so every president is guaranteed those appointments. And I would argue that we've got 13 federal circuits in America. We just have 9 Supreme Court justices, which means 4 federal circuits are left out at any one time when it's working at its best. But of course, it doesn't do that. The majority of federal circuits are excluded today. In fact, we've got 5 Supreme Court justices from New York City alone. We've got 5 justices, 1 for each borough in New York City. So we could move to a situation where every part of the country is actually represented on the Supreme Court and make it far more reflective of America.
Yeah, I think when I was at the New York AG's office, my gift limit was $15. And so that meant that you were really limited in what you could even get at the restaurant downstairs. You could maybe get a beer. That was it. And of course, nobody ever did anything as a result. And I don't know anybody in government at the federal, state, local level, anybody that has any giant gift limit any higher than that. Everybody's got a gift limit. It's all very low, as it should be, right? We don't want the possibility of any buying of influence. I mean, so how is this possible?
People stop me on the street now and they say, in my job, I'm not allowed to take any gifts from people who have interest in our business or who could affect.
Right. It's in the private sector too. That's
so
right.
Even like a beer or even, like a dinner out. Why does Justice Alito need to be taken out by anybody, much less be given trips around the world and deluxe vacations? Why doesn't Clarence Thomas just buy his own car? Why does he have to get a deluxe motor coach paid for by Harlan Crow, who has an interest in what the Supreme Court is going to decide? That's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It makes no sense.
Right. So let's turn next to voting. And I think that it'll be really helpful. Ranked choice voting, I know, has been a long time passion project of yours. I think some folks around the country know about it because it's been introduced in their localities. We've started to have it here. I'm in New York City. We've started to have it here. And of course, some of us are just, complete policy wonks. And so, of course, we know about ranked choice voting as a sort of political junkie. But I think it would be helpful to explain what it is and why it would be such an improvement over what we currently have.
Well, it's not just some of our most urban jurisdictions like New York City, which have adopted it. Some of our most rural places like Maine and Alaska, which have adopted ranked choice voting. So it really is spreading across the country, and for obvious reasons. One, it gives you a majority winner. People should not be getting elected to Congress or to any public office with 24% of vote or 28% of the vote. You have 9 candidates dividing up the vote. Somebody's going to win with a real minority of the overall vote. You could lose 70 or 75 or 80% of the total vote, but you end up in first and then suddenly you've won. Ranked choice voting says nobody wins until somebody gets 50% plus 1. But you don't have to go through the trouble of conducting 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 runoffs. The runoff is built into the voting system because if nobody gets to 50%, you drop the bottom candidate and you redistribute their ballots according to their second choice. And then if you still don't have somebody on the third ballot, then you drop the next candidate and you redistribute their ballots until you get somebody who crosses the 50% threshold. So one, it guarantees a 50% winner. 2, it's far more efficient than actually conducting all of those runoffs. 3, it dramatically reduces negative campaigning and negative politicking because, if we're running against each other in a multi-field race, I can say to people, Tristan is your first choice candidate. Well, he's great. I think he's awesome. But could you put me second? We agree on a lot of stuff. And so it promotes coalitional positive politics rather than, I've got to trash Tristan and tell everybody everything terrible I've ever heard about him or I can make up about it.
Right. And now, of course, all of the runoffs then can be done automatically on a computer, right? I mean, that obviously the technology part of this, it's been true for a while, but now it's just really super easy to do this.
It saves a ton of money for jurisdictions that are doing runoffs now. It saves a ton of money. I mean, some places you got to do it 2, 3, 4 times, run the election over again, pay for the election. And by the way, you get tremendous drop off along the way in terms of popular participation. If you use ranked choice voting, everybody will be able to participate in every runoff election just by ranking the candidates. And that's the trick, right? That if there are 10 people running for governor, you list them 1 through 10. And if there's a really popular person who wins with 70% of the vote on the first round, you never need to use the other ones. But if it's totally chopped up and somebody's got 30%, somebody's got 26%, and somebody's got 20%, and so on, you've ranked them, and then the computer can sort it out immediately.
Right. And then that also then helps with situations where if you've got one party that is definitely the party that's dominant in that locality, you can use it in a primary, right? Because that's often what we get here in New York, or it can happen in a different district as well, the other direction for the Republicans. But you'll have, like say for the mayoral election here, like you're going to have a whole bunch of candidates. We had ranked choice voting. People were still kind of getting used to it. I think it's going to be really interesting to see, at least here, how that looks in 2025. But yeah, there's a lot of different places that you wouldn't have expected that have adopted it. What would you like to see happen federally with it? What can we do?
Well, I mean, the reason people love it so much is because it prevents fringe or more extreme candidates from winning over people who can appeal to the broadest segment of people across party lines or across ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, sectional lines, what have you. And we have colleagues in Congress who are here because they won in a ranked choice voting system, including Mary Peltola from Alaska and Jared Golden from Maine. People from those jurisdictions love it. It makes a lot of sense. It eliminates the problem of the spoiler problem too, right? The spoiler problem is the idea that, in my heart of hearts, I'd love to have this person. I'm not sure if they can win, but I'm just going to vote for them, and then my vote is wasted.
Right.
But if you're able to rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no vote is wasted. Everybody's
because then you can pick your true favorite, put them first, and then put the one that you like and you think has probably got more of a chance to win and put them second.
Yeah, or you could put somebody who maybe has less of a chance to win second, but third you do that. Right, because you're not now competing against yourself. Got it.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Interesting. And then something that I've been talking about a lot of people have been talking about a lot, and that I really plan on focusing even more on coming up here, especially as we get into next year. Let's talk about all of the issues that we're seeing around foreign money and other interference in our politics. I know that you've been active on that front as well. I believe sponsoring a bill along with Senator Whitehouse in the Senate. We had him on here a few weeks ago. Tell us more about that effort and what you believe needs to be done to solve what I believe is one of the biggest problems in America today.
Yeah, I mean, Barack Obama really called it when Citizens United was handed down. I mean, he said, this is not only this huge, corporate power grab in essence, but what Obama said was that it will open the floodgates to foreign corporate money getting into our system, because corporations are not people. They don't have a human or national identity. So corporations can have foreign managers, they can have foreign directors, they can take foreign money. And so the Get Foreign Money Out bill is an attempt to deal with that particular aspect of the Citizens United problem. It doesn't deal with the problem that the Supreme Court has converted every corporate treasury in America into a political slush fund for the CEO, but at least it deals with the ones where foreign money can be brought in to bear on politicians, and there's no justification for that. We have a law against foreign corporate contributions, which has been upheld by the Supreme Court, even though it's hard to see why they upheld it on their argument, which is that money is just speech and you can never have too much speech, and so you can never have too much money. But at least they've seen the danger and the flaw of their own reasoning when it comes to foreign money. Well, we're trying to close a loophole within the Citizens United regime by saying, okay, the corporations that are dominated by foreign money, or where foreign money can come to influence politics, have got to be kept out.
Representative Raskin, thank you so much for stopping by. We really appreciate all of the hard work that you continue to do to help our democracy and to make our institutions a lot stronger. Please keep up the fight.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I mean, when we say we're defending democracy in 2024, we know that democracy is not a static collection of practices and institutions alone. It is a dynamic thing. It's always an unfinished project. And we've got to keep making democracy stronger and not lapsing into some other form of government like autocracy.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for our show. As always, make sure to follow this podcast so that you always get all of the latest episodes automatically downloaded to all of your devices. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and on Substack, where you can subscribe to me for free to get the latest in between episodes. And we will see you next time.